So when we use the increment borer tool, we use it at about 4 to 5 feet off the ground. And we're going to core into this Douglas fir here. I want you to imagine a time when this Douglas fir was 4 to 5 years old. At that time, its leader was just about this high, about 4 to 5 feet off the ground. And if we were to magically see a cross-section of the trunk and then went to the interior of that cross-section, you'd see that pith, that tiny dark spot. That pith, that tiny dark spot, is a remnant of the tree when it was about 4 to 5 years old, when its leader was just about this tall. We need to be able to account for the 4 to 5 years that it took for the tree to get this tall. And that's why at the very end of our calculation, we always add on 4 years to determine the final age of the tree. We're going to reference this a little bit later, but remember that we add on 4 years at the very end of our calculation, and it's to account for the time it took for the tree to get to be about 4 to 5 feet off the ground. So where do we start coring into the tree, in this case the Douglas fir? Well, trees, just like people, are different from one another. They all have different characteristics and different morphology. And the reality of a Douglas fir is that it has very furrowed bark. If you were to be a bug crawling across the trunk of the Douglas fir, you'd be going through peaks and valleys. The Douglas fir has very furrowed bark. So what you want to do is find one of those furrows on the Douglas fir, and you're going to place the threaded end of the bit in one of those furrows, and you're going to try to estimate where the center of the tree is. So look for what you believe to be the center of the trunk, center of the tree. Find the interior of the furrowed bark and place your bit at that point. Lean in and then start coring into the tree. You'll see that the threaded end catches pretty quickly, and it doesn't take much effort to start coring into the tree. So how far do you go in? I personally like to get as much of a wood sample as I can, or as long of a wood sample as I can. So when I begin to feel my knuckles rasping against the bark, I know it's about time to stop. Okay, so we've cored into the tree, just about to the point where I feel it's okay to stop. And now it comes time to use that extractor or the spoon that you set aside. Hopefully it's easy to spot. Or if you have a buddy that you're working with, ask the buddy to hand the spoon to you. So that spoon, that extractor, is now going to be inserted into the bit. And extractors are also very easy to bend, so you need to be careful when you put the extractor or the spoon into the increment borer. I like to guide it in with one hand and push gently on the other, and you'll feel the resistance. You'll know you have a wood sample inside the bit. Don't push too hard. When you start to feel some resistance, then it's time to stop. So now we will rotate the handle counterclockwise a couple of turns. And why do we do that? Well, some foresters believe that it is effectively snapping off the wood sample inside the trunk itself. So once we've done that, we should be able to extract the wood sample. Then, as you extract the extractor, you want to guide it out slowly. In a perfect world, hopefully, what you'll have is an intact sample of wood from the interior of the tree. So what we're going to do ultimately is take a close-up view of this wood sample and begin examining the xylem layers, those alternating bands of late wood and early wood, those alternating bands of dark wood and light wood that will help us to determine the tree's age. Okay, and when you're done collecting your wood sample, it's important to try to get the bit out of the tree as quickly as you can, because as I mentioned, when the tree responds by sending resin to the area, sometimes resin can get inside of the bit itself and can clog things up for later on when you're trying to get another wood sample from another tree. So try to remove the bit and the increment borer itself as quickly as you can. Well, I'm often asked by teachers if coring into the tree harms it, hurts the tree in the long run. And my answer invariably is no, it doesn't harm the tree. Think of it this way. Trees have been around for decades, in some cases hundreds of years. They've seen fires, they've seen windstorms, they've seen attacks by beetles, they've seen other kinds of injuries. Trees are very good at defending themselves against injuries. And how do they do so? Well, they have an interior immune system that's somewhat similar to our immune system, in that when they are injured, they send resin to the area of injury. And just like if somebody were to poke you with a needle, if the doctor were to poke you with a needle when you're immunized, your body responds by sending blood to the area of injury and clotting up the injury. A blood clot will form and you will initiate the healing process. Same with a tree. Whenever they get poked, they send resin to the area where the tree was cored into, and that hole will be plugged fairly quickly. Trees are very good at defending themselves that way. So if you go to the doctor and the doctor immunizes you, you're going to hurt for a little bit, but your body will respond and you will heal up very quickly. Same with the tree. However, if the doctor has a mean streak and he wants to poke you several times over, that kicks in some extra effort on your part. Your immune system kicks into overdrive, and you still may be able to fend off the injury, but your chances of infection will increase. Same with the trees. If I were to sit here and core into the same tree over and over and over and over again, I increase the chances of some kind of vector or a fungus getting to the interior of the tree, and that can increase the likelihood of infection. But if all I do is core the tree once and then depart, the tree will be very successful in fending off that injury and healing itself.